Welcome to We and Lewis, a podcast dedicated to celebrating the remarkable, creative, and energetic people who live in Lewis and are helping our community forge a collective soul as appealing as it is unique. These are their stories in their words. They are the We in Lewis. I'm your host, Kevin McGinnis. This episode is the second half of our interview with Jim Semivan. Jim retired in 2007 after a distinguished 25-year career at the Central Intelligence Agency, both in the field and at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. In 2017, Jim, along with Tom Delong, a guitarist with Blink 182 and Angels and Airways, as well as others, founded To the Stars. The company has multiple areas of interest ranging from scientific analysis and discovery to books, television shows, and films, all of which involve the study of what we used to call UFOs and now is referred to as the phenomenon. Like its predecessor, today's episode is being brought to you by a new sponsor of the podcast, Clean Fuego. Clean Fuego is an essential training device for any baseball or softball player looking to learn or maintain pitch or throw quality. Used by the pros in top college programs, it helps with grip and release and allows anyone to see in real time how they're doing. There's nothing electronic about it. No need to charge it, connect it to the Wi-Fi, or download an expensive app. All you have to do is throw, and you'll instantly know how you're doing. Check out the website at www.cleanfuego.com. Your child or grandchild will love you for it. We're going to pick up where we left off with Jim explaining what the term phenomenon means in the context of non-human life.
Phenomenon includes anything that really we don't understand, that's presented to us. And, so it could mean anything from, UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena, to abduction scenarios. It encompasses remote viewing, psychokinesis, the other psychic phenomena that's out to telepathy, clairvoyance. All those things are basically part of the phenomenon as a rule. Now, we generally refer to the phenomenon now. It wasn't something that we did maybe 15 years ago, but now we do because we know, or we think we know, that there's a connection between all of these things. Because we know that the phenomena that we do experience, particularly regarding UAP, has some of these aspects associated with it. So, I mean, we're making these assumptions. Now, go ahead.
UAPs. Can you define what that is?
Yeah, we used to call it unidentified flying objects. But Jacques Vallée, who's probably the grand master of research in this area, made a really good point. He said, unidentified, yeah, I can go with that. He said, but flying, we don't know if they're flying. They appear, they do incredible acrobatics and maneuverability, right? And there's no visible means of propulsion on any of this stuff. They're transmedium, right? They go through the air, space, in the water. So are they really flying? And because sometimes they appear and then they just sort of disappear within a fraction of a second. And objects. Are they objects? Are they physical objects? Or are they just projections? Or are they both? We don't know. So they thought it really would be better to say anomalous phenomenon, unidentified anomalous phenomenon, because that really sort of captures, everything in a grander sense. So.
How did you get interested or involved in this area?
Well, I had an older brother who passed away a few years ago, and who was always he was a very devout Catholic. We grew up Catholics. I left the church when I was very young, but my brother never did. And he became very heavily involved in Western mysticism and lives of the saints, things along those lines. And then he got involved in Eastern mysticism, basically as a hobby. So I admired him greatly. He was a true genius. I mean, his IQ was very high, and he would always recommend things for me. So, and I started reading about esoterica. I got into the Greek mystery schools, Roman mystery schools, Western mysticism. And then when I was in graduate school, you get into more of that. I started reading a lot of Emerson. And if you read Ralph Waldo Emerson, you know that a great deal of his library is composed of books by a 17th century Swedish mystic named Emanuel Swedenborg. Well, then you start reading Swedenborg, and Swedenborg starts talking about going to heaven, meeting the angels, and then other kind of entities and spiritual beings. And what happens is all this cascades, right? It follows into one another. And you realize that there's a whole hidden world out there of the occult, and not in the common sense of the occult. The occult just means secret and hidden, but it's just a whole other way of looking at things that is real, but we can't explain it because we don't know how to explain it. We know telepathy, for instance, is real. We've done scientific experiments on it. Yes, it's true. We know that clairvoyance is real. We know remote viewing is real. Yes.
And remote viewing, yes. I mean, that I didn't realize till I was looking. The CIA has a whole explanation and analysis that they've released.
Well, CIA started a remote viewing program with, I know very well. I know the person who actually started the program very well. He worked for CIA. And then Hal Puthoff, who's the quantum physicist who they picked up at Stanford, who decided on a whim that, he found this interesting too. So he picked it up. And for 20 odd years, probably longer than that, we were putting, I don't know how many millions a year into remote viewing because we knew that the Russians were experimenting with this and telekinesis and other.
What is remote viewing?
Remote viewing, I'll give you the simplest explanation is, you would give somebody, say, coordinates, okay, or sometimes you can just give them not even coordinates, just like a particular place. And you say, look at the moon, or look at Russia in this particular area. And what they would do, they would go out, they would get very quiet. And you could learn how to do this, by the way. There are tons of books out there, some good, some not so good. You can learn how to do this. Everybody has some type of ability. Most don't do it well. Some do it extraordinarily well. You go out on what the maybe an Indian sadhu or a yogi would call the silver cord, right? You go out and you let your mind go out, and you get into a state of relaxation. But you let your mind go out, and you sort of focus on the coordinates, but you don't heavily focus. You don't want to get tied to it. And then you let it go. And then you end up seeing images, and you end up seeing scenes. For instance, you end up drawing a lot of pictures, but it's more of a right brain thing than a left brain thing from what I understand. I've never tried it. I've spoken to people that have remote viewers, and some of it is, what they're able to do is absolutely incredible. And it works. I happen to have been in the agency when they canceled the program. And the person who canceled the program was a dear friend of mine. And it wasn't until later, when I got to know him, he was very senior, and I got to know him more. And I asked him, why did you cancel that program? I said, you know it worked. And he goes, yeah. He said, but the problem was we couldn't explain it. And he said, think about it. He said, he said, you want to go to the president and you want to say, China's building an aircraft that looks like it's more advanced than our stealth fighter or something like that. And the president goes, oh my gosh. He said, where did you get this information? And you say, well, this guy went out on his silver cord, and he went, to this place. And he goes, well, do you have any corroborating evidence? No, we don't, or we think we do, but, it's not. So in other words, CIA writes intelligence assessments for the president and National Security Council and for everybody else. I mean, you can't put information in there that you don't have any kind of, I don't know, local source for. You know what I mean? You could point to it and said, yeah, we got it from this particular, conversation or what have you. So, yeah, it was one of those things we couldn't. But I've personally seen some of the classified versions of it. Absolutely incredible. Unclassified, there's been some incredible stuff too. It works. It just simply works. We just simply can't explain it.
what led to your founding with Tom DeLong and others To the Stars?
That was an interesting one. It was one of these. I was by this point, for about a year, I had been. My wife and I had a very odd experience in our home when we were living in Virginia, and I won't get into it here; it's just too convoluted. But it was just a very strange experience. But anyway, from that experience, this happened in the early '90s. But I ran into somebody from the Pentagon at a conference, and maybe 2014, 2015, and he had just written a book on UFOs. And I told him about this experience my wife and I had, and he put me in touch with some other people, some DARPA-related scientists and some intelligence community scientists and officers. And I got in touch with them, and one thing led to another. But anyway, one day I got a call from two of these people, scientists, who said, do you know Tom DeLong? You ever hear of a fellow named Tom DeLong? And I said, no. You know Blink 182? What's that?
I can't believe that was your music, if I may say.
Yeah, my music was, Motown, and the Stones, right? And the Beatles and stuff. So, I mean, it all ended in 75 with me. So I said, no. And they said, well, he's an interesting character. He wrote a book called Secret Machines, Secret with a K. And I said, okay. And they said, I think you should read the book, and I think you should listen to a podcast he was on. So I did. And I went, oh, this is interesting. And on the book was fascinating, by the way. And there was a lot of information in the book that I thought it sounded very familiar, but it sounded also sort of maybe quasi-classified. I wasn't 100% sure. So, but when I listened to Tom on this podcast, he was talking about having all these advisors that he had met, very senior people, former high-ranking officials. So there was a concern, by some of these guys that, is anything leaking?
How is a rock guitarist getting into this world like he is?
And it was more that than anything else. And but it was what he was saying. I mean, he's an extremely intelligent guy, and he puts two and two together all the time. And I've been amazed by him. And so they said, well, why don't we go out and meet him? Why don't you go out and meet him? So I got in touch with him. I found out how to get in touch with him. Got in touch with him, and he was more than happy. And I met him at a hotel, very beautiful hotel, and he had a room for us, and we had a nice dinner, just us two. And in the meantime, I've had four other guys, from DC follow me out, in another hotel, waiting for me to come back, And so after about a 2.5 hour, 3 hour conversation and a wonderful dinner with Tom, I realized that there was no leakage of any information at all. It's just the idea that some of his advisors were basically guiding him, because he was writing books and he wanted to know what I needed to sound. He made a big point. I don't want to get anything classified. I just, steer me down a right path so I can write decent books. And they would. And now he never told me who these advisors were. So anyway, long story short, I went back and I said, no, he's totally legit. And I said, he just happens to be an extremely bright guy, and he's putting all this stuff together. And so he also invited me to lunch the next day, and I accepted. And they said, could we go? And I said, absolutely. So we all went to this place. And we're all, I mean, really, these were the cream of the crop of the UFO guys, right? And UAP guys. They're all ex-government. And we're all sitting around this table with Tom. And then Tom just says, well, what we ought to do? We ought to start a company. We ought to get this out. And I said, wow, it's fascinating. I said, and nobody was interested in it. I wasn't interested in it. I said, I don't want to be part of a company. And he goes, why? And I said, I just quiet about it. I said, there's classified areas here I don't want to get into, and just too problematic. He said, well, if you had to do it, how would you do it? So I sketched on a napkin what I would like. And Tom already had a company set up, sort of looking into this, where they're going to write books and all kind of stuff. So I said, let's add a research and development side. Let's do this. So Hal Putoff was there with me and some other guys. The other guys said, no, they don't want to do it. But Hal said, yeah. I said, yeah. And Tom said, yeah. We shook hands, and that's how it started. And we created it.
Did you keep the napkin?
I have to look for that. I hope I did. But anyway, then not too long after that, Lou Elizondo, who was, head of ATIP, who was, running this UAP program for the Pentagon. I had been doing some unofficial consulting for the Pentagon, for Lou's group. I would come in and they would talk to me and show me things and what have you. And fascinating. And he was showing me the problems that Navy was having, in particular with this particular phenomenon. These tic-tacs that were showing up over, carrier groups, showing up over nuclear sites, things along those lines. Some interesting, fascinating, heavily classified ones, too, they obviously can't get into. So something's going on, right? And these are senior people, and they're worried. So Lou decided he was going to quit because he couldn't get any traction, couldn't get enough funds to move it. So I put him in touch with Tom. Tom met him and hired him to work for us, or work for our company, and he did for a few years. And that's when we became really public. We took it out, and then Chris Mellon came in, former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, and then we got the former number 2 guy at the Skunk Works to come in, and a bunch of other luminaries. And then we announced ourselves in Seattle.
You started this company, and it seems that you're looking at different ways to help educate people about what's really happening.
Yeah, the goal was, I know, I knew then and I know now that the government isn't going to come completely clean on this. And I don't think they can. And I like to give the government the benefit of the doubt because I worked for the government for a long time. And people call it a bureaucracy and what have you. I don't see that. I see very, very hardworking people are trying to do the best job they can for the American people. That's how I view our government. It's the best damn civil service in the world, as far as I'm concerned. But I also know that they have national security concerns on this issue, big ones. And then they also have other concerns. How the hell do you explain this? And
But things seem to be changing.
They're changing. Yes, they most definitely are. The 2017 New York Times article, I don't know if you saw it, that came out, and it had the videos, of the gimbal and Go Fast and the other one, I can't remember the name, the Tic Tac. And when that came out, that changed everything. Everything. We had tons of people have been slaving away on this topic. This whole UFO community, UAP community. Then finally, one little New York Times article sort of switches it all, and that happened because a couple, Lou and Chris Mellon, got a hold of some New York Times people, and they pulled me in with Hal Putoff, and we all sat in a hotel lobby near the Pentagon, and basically said, look at these, all right, and then this is who we are, this is what we're trying to do, and we want to make this a public venue. So we debated for a long time how our company would work, and we wanted this to get away from the government. The government's going to do what the government does. I wasn't going to wait for the government. I wasn't going to file FOIA requests till I'm blue in the face. You could do all that stuff. But I knew the government had good reasons for not doing this, for whatever they were. Or reasons, good or bad, I don't know. But to me, it was almost a waste of time because this is very, very well hidden in the government. So I said, let's take it private. They don't own this topic. This topic appears everywhere around the world. It's constantly happening. It happened to me. It happened to tons of people I know. Let's look at this from a private perspective. Let's see if we can start a company, generate some funds, and start investigating it on our own. And then, then if we find anything out, we can share it with the government. Don't care. Don't want a quid pro quo with them. Just share it with them. This is what we found out with some of these new relational databases that we have, using AI and what have you. And this is some of the signals we found in the noise you might be interested in. Don't have to, acknowledge it or anything like that. Just here it is, and then walk away. So we haven't done that yet. We're planning on doing that. We definitely have the connections to that for that. And then, of course, all hell broke loose when Dave Grush, senior, I think it was National Geospatial Agency or NRO. I don't know where he was working for at the time, but he was working for AARO, the Pentagon's all anomalous research office, and he found out. He did some really deep digging, and he found out a lot of interesting things. He did it the right way. I don't necessarily agree with the fact that he did it, because what this was is Congress wanting to get the information, and it's an executive program, and Congress is saying we have a right to know, and this is a very sticky widget because hell yeah, I want to know, and so does everybody else want to know. I mean, it's the big meatball hanging out there, right? And it's there. I mean, it's obvious. I mean, evidence for it is overwhelming. Will somebody in the government say something? We know you know something, but the government is not doing that.
Are there some legitimate governmental reasons for sort of downplaying it? Maybe not to the degree of all the personal attacks and so on, but downplaying it. I mean, are there security or military advantage or civic alarm? Are these some of the considerations that go into how the hell are we going to deal with this?
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there's probably a myriad of them. I can't speak for the government at all. I don't know the exact reasons for them. I'm pretty sure national security is right up there as the number one. Don't forget, if we have it, if we have downcraft or we have information, so does China and so does Russia, and so do other nations. What's amazing to me that this has been kept this quiet. You worked for the government. You sort of know what how these things have a tendency to leak, and a lot of this stuff has leaked. The problem with it is the people that leaked it, there's nobody senior coming out, really senior, coming out with the evidence in their hand. Right now, all we have is we have anecdotal data, we have a lot of radar data, a lot of sensor data, we have a lot of first-hand data. People have eyewitnesses to all this. We have plenty of evidence. The evidence is overwhelming that this is actually real. I know it's real because I've seen things, and it's real. So you look at the government and you say, well, they're in a sort of a fine fiddle here, because let's say, right now in the community, the UAP community, they're talking about they want disclosure, and disclosure is the big way. They want the government to come out and say it, and Congress wants it. The Schumer Amendment came out, and the Schumer Amendment, is pushing for this. The American people have a right to know. The world population has the right to know. Couldn't agree more. They absolutely do. But how do you do it? How do you do it? Now there's a debate between controlled disclosure and what could end up being catastrophic disclosure if everything comes out. So let's just say, I'll give you for instance, if you go for controlled disclosure, President Trump goes into a press conference and says, I'm not going to say everything, he said, but I'm going to say that we're not alone. We're not alone on this planet. And how do I know that? It's because we have evidence, downcraft, or whatever he wants to say, but it's very limited. And he says that. Now, you're an attorney. What's the first 1,000 questions that you have, right? Yeah, you're going to cross-examine him till he's blue in the face. And what's he supposed to say? Is he supposed to say, I can't talk about it? The story of the millennia? I can't say anything more? I'm sorry? No, this is it would be the briefing that generated, unlimited amount of questions on a topic.
Or would he say all those drones were authorized?
Yeah.
Which he recently did, the staff recently did with regard to the New Jersey.
Yeah, and that's not true. But it's okay. Some were UAP, but most of them were basically hobbyists, and there was also some I think some shenanigans going on with some people who were deliberately doing this, but it's neither here nor there at the moment. But controlled disclosure, I think, is almost impossible to do.
Once it starts,
because everybody's going to jump in, right? And now you have a narrative, and the narrative, we're not alone. in the universe. And so you're going to have religious scholars, you're going to have every pundit, around the world, begging for more information. And who's going to fill the gaps? Alex Jones? Are you going to get, you're going to get left wing and right wing pundits start talking about this to fill the narrative in, creating all basically nonsense and conspiracy theories running. I mean, we're having enough trouble right now with conspiracy theories and disinformation from our own people and our government saying things that are absolutely not true. And it's confusing a lot of people. And that means less confidence in the government. And I loathe that. I've worked for government. I've worked with not only CIA, but with FBI, NSA, with the military, all the branches of the military. I can't begin to tell you how proud I am of them and what a great job that they do, and what a great job, that people that what you did when you worked. I mean, people who work for the government, who work for senators and congressmen, these staffers. It's a hard job. It is not an easy job. And your primary reason for doing it is basically making sure America has the best information and America's running in the best way it possibly can run. Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter. You're trying to do the damn job. And to see that being picked at all the time. Yeah, we got problems, but it needs to be tweaked. It doesn't need to be screwed over. But anyway, I don't want to get into a political discussion here. But let's just say he does controlled. So you have the abduction, the woo-woo stuff comes out. What do you do with that? What do you do? Well, one of the things, for instance, that I've learned and that I know is accurate for me. I know it's just accurate. It's accurate for everybody. These non-human intelligence, whatever this is that's controlling these craft, have the ability to basically speak to us telepathically if and when they want to. We know that they can basically control aspects of your mind. There's mind control aspects of this. They can put memories in your mind. They can direct traffic, so to speak, as they see fit. We know that there's a trickster element involved, that sometimes they lie when they do meet people. They show up in somebody's bedroom, or they show up someplace in their backyard or on a country road, and they'll say things to them. Sometimes it might be true. Sometimes it might not be true. We don't know. And since we don't know, and they have these incredible powers that are much better than ours, well, what about free will? Where does that come in? What about sovereignty? The idea that you wake up every morning and you think you're in control of your life because, you choose what you want to do. You're going to get up this morning, I'm going to shave, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to have lunch with so-and-so and be on a podcast with this, this little crazy guy. And then I'm going to, have dinner tonight, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to go to church, and I'm going to believe what I believe.
I'm sorry, in your example, who's the crazy guy between the two of us?
I did that on purpose.
Oh, I know.
But anyway, you basically think you're in charge.
Right.
You remember that old concept called the Great Chain of Being. It was an old medieval concept, and basically most people live by it today. There's God up the top, and then there's humans, and then there's gorillas, and and then you go down just taxonomy, right? And you go down to the lowest form that you possibly know of, but we're up there. Anybody better than us is God, right? And we'll live with that. But what if there's another species or species, out there that are basically in between us and that God concept, whatever you want to call God? What if there's somebody up there that is you can call them angels, or jinn, is the maybe the Arab scholars would call them, or you call it maybe a cosmic force, whatever the story is, an intelligence. But it's a control mechanism. It has the ability to control you and the ability to control your life, and not your life, but everybody else's lives. That really is not a very good thing I think, to throw out there. You're going to have every 11-year-old, right, having nightmares, because their world order is now shaken. And they call it ontological shock, and it's essentially what it is. I had that when I got a briefing once. We had discussed this before the podcast. It was a classified briefing, and it wasn't so much about UAP, although UAP was involved, but it was about other things about the world that I thought may be true, but wasn't really sure. But it was really interesting, esoteric, occult stuff, and it turned out to be true. And I was given sort of enough proof that I believed it, but it put me in a state of shock. I would say for at least 3 months. And my wife saw me, and she said, "What happened?" And I didn't even tell her anything. And she knew. I just had that distant stare. So what happens is, are people ready to have their reality changed to such an extent that it interrupts their lives? Will it, and then will it interrupt, commerce? Will it interrupt religion? The people who have supposedly met NHI and asked about God, Jesus.
What is NHI?
Non-human intelligence. The answer was no. That's your religion, but it's not part of anything. I mean, it's not. In other words, it's your idea of, it's how you view the world, but it's not part of it. I mean, it's a story. It's a narrative that you've created. Now, can you trust them when they say that? I don't know. But is it enough to basically screw around with your head and the heads of young people? And it can create all kinds of problems and issues. So I think the government knows that. I had two friends of mine who were on a panel. It was done in 2004. And it was a think tank. And the think tank basically gave them the question. Here's what we know about UAP or UFOs at the time they called it. And given what we know about them, should this become public? Should the government release this information? Should it become public? And there was something like 50 people involved, from all different walks of life. Lawyers, sociologists, psychologists, all kinds of academic scientists. And the people told me that they all sort of agreed in the very beginning, without thinking it through, that absolutely, we have a right to know. And then after the 2-day conference, I think it was a 2.5-day conference, all of them said exactly the opposite. This should never be released. They sat down and they put up what they call a mess map, where you basically put stickies on the board and say, well, here's an area we have to worry about. Here's an area we have to worry about. What if this happens? How do we counter that? And it got so complex and so problematic that a lot of them weren't sure that the outcome, if you allowed disclosure to happen, would be good, or wouldn't maybe collapse either civilization or parts of civilization, or create enough trauma that within the government, within the population writ large, that it was worth actually getting into it. Right now, we're living this really interesting scenario, right? You're sitting here talking to me. I'm the crazy little guy talking about UAPs, telling you it's all true. And you have the ability to go home and say, he's an idiot. Or it may be true, it may not be true, whatever. But you're safe because you're living in this in-between place, right? This liminal place where you don't really know one way or the other. And it's a safe place for you. So you can always say at night before I go to bed, and you're thinking about this, it's running through your head, and you go, it's all bullshit. It ends. But when you know it's true, if you're an experiencer and you've seen it up close and personal, there's no going back. There's no going back. You back in the old days in the 60s, we used to say, it's confronting that void, right? You look into the abyss and you see maybe what's in there or what's not in there. There's very little coming back from that. And I don't know if a lot of people are ready for that. I really don't. I mean, what is it? 40-50% of the people in the U.S. read at a 6th grade level. And I'm not trying to denigrate, them. That's the educational system. That doesn't mean they're not smart people and what have you, but they're not interested. Many of them can't point to Miami on a map. Many of them they couldn't name 20 states in the Union. I mean, their attention is focused on other places. And that's basically Maslow's hierarchy, right? They want to have food on the table. They want a place to live and it's clean. And they want to have some kind of income going on. So they're not bothering with everything else. And then you're going to throw this at them? Oh, by the way,
Well, and then there's the human nature that when it confronts a really, really, really difficult problem, one that may be impossible to solve, it's easier just to go, nope.
That's right.
I don't have to worry about whether it's true or not. I'm just going to ignore it.
Well, this is what we do now. I mean, that's what we're doing now. And it wasn't until Congress actually saw the evidence, the classified evidence, that they realized something's up. There's something definitely going on here. And when you see the evidence, the classified evidence, there's no turning back from that. I mean, it's absolutely real. So you now say, well, okay, how do I go about doing this? But I haven't heard anything from Congress about how they plan, if they do get this information, how they plan on letting this out. I haven't heard anything to me makes any sense whatsoever.
Jim, for those people who are still listening.
Yeah, right. Probably giving you a headache.
No, but who are still listening, and I mean, this is pretty unsettling stuff. I mean, the world as we know it is not. We keep getting very strong signals that the world as we know it isn't what we think it is. What sort of comforting observation can you give people so that you just don't completely freak out?
You really have to have a sort of a strong footing in your spiritual beliefs. One of the things that nobody's ever really addressed was, if UAP is real, which it is, how does it fit in with the grander scheme? How does it fit in with near-death experiences? How does it fit in with remote viewing? How does it fit in with all the 26 different types of psychic phenomena that exist out there? How does it fit? How does it fit in when people have these near-death experiences and they go to heaven, or they see the light and they go into the light and of course they all come back because otherwise we wouldn't know, but they go to the light and they see this absolutely wonderful, beautiful place filled with nothing but love. Sometimes religious figures are there, most of the time not. But it's family, it's just a loving, loving place, and they learn that in the end that their body is just a suit, and that's a corporeal suit, and it eventually dies. But really, what's the essence of you is the soul, your spirit, right? Energy can either be created or destroyed. So that energy, when your body decomposes and goes away, the energy that keeps you moving every day has to go someplace. So it goes to this place. This is at least my belief system. It goes to another place, and the place, from everything I've heard, the people who come back from this place, it is absolutely beautiful. And so it leads you to think that, okay, so consciousness has a role to play, a universal consciousness. There's a big debate now, is it local or is it non-local? I'm talking about consciousness here. I happen to believe it's non-local. Some people believe it's still associated with the brain, and when we die, everything goes to hell, and that's it, you know what I mean? And but I don't believe that. I believe we actually go someplace else to a larger thing. So for me, that's the soothing aspect. I know that I'm going to go to some place where I'll get some answers, maybe not all the answers, but I'll get some answers. And this is what all religions teach. All religions teach really two fundamentals, right? Almost every major religion out there talks about sky gods. I mean, when you talk about cosmology, it's sky gods coming down. I mean, read Genesis. I mean, it's sky gods coming down, giving us either life or giving us, civilization and what have you, and then what happens, they give us this, and then they give us ways to live, and they also say, well, if you follow these rules and regulations, you can go where we live, you can go where we're at. So it's the whole idea of transformation, resurrection, what have you, the second birth. So yeah, I mean, in a sense, that's what I look at. That's the comforting thing I see in all of this. We might have an entity or entities that are greater than us that can control us, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're better than us, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they would want to. They've been around for 2,000 years. I mean, we have evidence that goes back so far, but yet they've never announced themselves. Don't you find that odd? I find it incredibly odd. They show up, they dance around in the sky, and they come up and they scare the living hell out of people sometimes, when they show up in your backyard or in your bedroom or someplace. But they never really say where they're from. They never really, they all were from the Pleiades or were from this star system, and they make some funny name up. And then, and you sort of take it and you go, oh, it must be true. We don't know if it's true or not. It could be just an intelligence, some kind of Gaia, some kind of Earth intelligence, a universal intelligence that's we don't understand or we can't see, that's doing this in a form that we understand, high tech, Buck Rogers, Star Trek kind of stuff. Maybe they use another way of communicating, with people in the past. The great airships that showed up in 1897 across the midsection of the United States, they showed up as ships. I mean, ships, boats, and with people that dressed like sailors, and they would have little ropes coming down and ladders, and these people would crawl down, and they were writing about it in newspapers. People saw them, preachers would see them, and they would talk about it. What the hell is that about? I mean, they manifest themselves that way. They manifest themselves any way they want to manifest themselves. I'm not particularly worried about it. I consider what happened to me a human rights violation because there was damage involved. And with other people, there was damage involved, serious damage involved. That said, most of the people that I know have had these experiences, they turn a corner with it. And this is, one of the leitmotifs that runs through this. They usually tend to turn a corner and they have an epiphany or some type of soul change. They see this as a highly spiritual event and a learning experience that transforms them. Some develop psychic abilities, some develop healing abilities, some see the world in a completely different way, a beautiful, loving way. It's like people who had NDEs. Almost everybody's had an NDE. There's about 10% who have bad NDEs, which, hope I never have. But most people who have NDEs, near-death experiences, come back changed, totally changed people. They live in the present. They don't think about the future because they're not worried about death. I mean, we're born knowing eventually that we're going to die, right? So no instruction booklet, no nothing. All we have as guideposts are some innate, I think, ethical and moral compasses, I think, that we all have as humans. But the only guidebooks that exist are religion. And I don't have much faith in those, to be honest with you. If you read the history of some of these religions, you realize, little iffy. But that's just me. Other people, but whatever works for you it's fine. So that's sort of where we are, and it's scary. It's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing for most people, even religious people, deeply religious people. They always have their doubts, and that doubt's scary, but that's what we're left with. But as we talked about before the podcast, if you want to get scared, really scared, talk to a quantum physicist and ask them, according to quantum mechanics, what does our world look like? And then prepared to be totally shocked. And if you're not totally shocked, then you're not thinking properly, because it is, it is, to me, probably the most incredibly fascinating concept. The idea that we may be illusions, or that we're, at the least, we're spinning energy patterns, right? Molecules, atoms spinning around one another. And the only reason we're physical, how we are, is because of these opposing forces with the electrons and stuff banging into one another. Right? That's why my hand doesn't go through this table, right? And it's weak nuclear force and a strong nuclear force and all this other kind of stuff. But basically, when you look at it, a quantum physicist will tell you, no, you're just an energy pattern. In the end, you're just an energy pattern. And if you go deeper into that energy pattern and take a blow up of an atom and get into the the quarks and everything else, there's pretty much nothing there. The idea, if an atom was blown up the size of a house, you can see the nucleus, and then the electrons would be probably way, way too far away for you to even see. So what are you really looking at? And it's just space. So any atom is mostly space as opposed to anything else, with maybe just a hint of energy in the middle of all that. And we haven't been able to penetrate that too deeply. That atom. We can split the atom, and we can look at some things in it, but that's what Fermilab is for, and CERN, and all these other particle colliders, hadron colliders. Well, that's what they're looking at. It's trying to find the basic elements of the universe. So you have all that to contend with too. But yet we don't live our lives like that, thinking about that. We can't do that. It's like driving a car down the road. We can't think about all the processes that are going on in our body and brain that allow us to do the driving. We're driving 3,500 pounds of metal down a road going 65 miles an hour with cars coming the other side. And you're thinking, I'm paying attention. I've got my hands on the wheel, but you're not thinking about how you're breathing, how your body works, and the blood's going to your brain and all this other kind of stuff. The myriad systems, the biological systems that make you able to do that. You can't. Your mind won't allow that in. Your mind just basically stops it. Just like your brain basically has a sensor system, but the sensor system is very, very limited. So we're walking around blinkered almost all the time. And
in order to get through the day.
And that's how we were created. That's who we are. But now, we all have self-consciousness, right? But now we're sort of seeing a new way of looking at things. Quantum mechanics brought this out. UAP is part of this. There's something else out there, and some people are reaching for it, and they can't quite get it. It's something I tell young people all the time. I can't tell you how many emails I get every week about people who are interested in this, and they want to talk about it. They want to know how they can get more involved. And I would tell them, look, you're going down a rabbit hole here that there's no answers, none, and none are apparent. And it is a wilderness of mirrors. You can get lost in this very, very quickly. There isn't a month that doesn't go by that I pull away myself and say, this is it. I'm done. I'm going to sell all my books in my man cave and just, go to the beach and hang out. It's just too much. And then somebody will call me up with an interesting story and you get drawn back into it. But I said, look, live your life. If you're married, take care of your wife and your kids. And then, when you're older and you have some time and you're grounded, you're well grounded, then you can look into this. But at 18 years old, 21 years old, 25 years old, you better be tethered to the ground really well before you start looking at this, because this is going to eat you alive if you spend too much time with it. You don't want to do that. You want to live your life. You were meant to live this life, and it doesn't necessarily mean you were meant to, dive into a deep hole. It's like philosophy students, you know what I mean? And, it's really hard being a philosophy student, getting a PhD in philosophy. I mean, these guys just think all the time, right? And it could be extraordinarily stressful on their system.
If I'm hearing what you're saying, before I get to my last question, if I hear what you're saying is we have all these governmental agencies, all of these that are working on this issue. So it's hard to believe if there was nothing going on. If you want to dismiss everything else, the fact that there's so many different governmental agencies working on these topics, it should give you an indication they're studying something. And this question now, my last question for you, which is going to seem ridiculous given what we've just been talking about, is how the hell did you end up here in Lewis?
Lewis is wonderful, isn't it? I'll never forget first time my wife and I, we don't have any children, and we've been married, 40 some odd years now. And we're lucky in the sense that we both like the same things pretty much. And we were looking at one point to finding a place we can go to for weeks at a time or a month at a time, take vacations or something. So we were looking all through the, East Coast, and We had tried California and Florida. We didn't like Florida. California was too far. So somebody said, well, you ought to go up, to the peninsula and look. And so we went to Kilmarnock and all of these places, and then to the Eastern Shore and all this kind of stuff. And then we drove into Lewis as a lark, and we just drove in and we went downtown and we stayed. We decided to spend the night at the Swanendale Inn, it was called at the time. It was probably called something totally different, the Rodney Inn or something. I don't know what it was back then. And we stayed one night and we absolutely fell in love with it. So we decided, that if my wife looked at me and she said, if we ever get enough money, we're going to buy a house here. So I go along with almost everything she says because she's a smart lady. So so we said fine. So we used to come every summer, for a week or so, and stay in this Swanendale and go to the beach and have fun. And then in 2000, and this was like 1991, and it wasn't until 2005 we came here, and my wife had started to practice. Our last assignment was in Rome, and we had left Rome in 2000, and my wife started a big practice, a clinical practice. She was doing neuropsychology, and she was doing very, very well. And she said, we have the money to buy another house. And I said, fine. So we came to Lewis. We were driving down, and we found a house on Dewey Avenue, near Lloyd's. And old stick Victorian. So we fell in love with it. So my wife just walked right up to the guy and who was rehabbing it. And he was the owner, and he was rehabbing it. I said, you selling this house? And he said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I am. And she said, okay. So she called up a realtor right there. And I always let my wife go. I mean, she knows what the hell she's doing. Let her go. And she was on top of it, had the realtor there. And realtor came within like 20 minutes. And she started talking to the guy. And she said, why don't you go have dinner? I'll call you.
To you?
To us. She said, I'll take care of it. So we went into Rehoboth. And we're at the back porch cafe or what it was. It turned out her boyfriend was the bartender there. So we're in there, we're having dinner, and then about half an hour later, he comes over with a couple glasses of champagne, and he said, you just bought a house. And we said, really? He goes, yeah. So we got in the car, we drove back, and sure enough, we met the realtor there, and she shook our hand, and the guy shook our hand, and the price was agreed on, and it was really nice. So we lived there from 2005, and it wasn't until we decided to move up here permanently about 4 or 5 years ago. But we decided in 2010 we needed a bigger place. So 2014. So we bought a lot on Manila Avenue, the street over, and Russ Palmer, a local construction, a wonderful, wonderful guy. He built us just a really pretty house, exactly how my wife wanted it. And we were very, very lucky to have him as a contractor. I'm not trying to plug him, by the way. I think he's retired, but he's a super, super guy. And then we moved up here about 4 years ago. We had a gradual, we sold our house in Virginia, and then we were living in a condo in Old Town for a while. But we found out we were never there, or rarely ever there. So we decided, just come up here and move. And I quit consulting, and my wife sold her business. And so now it's just us. Yeah, and it's fun. We love it. We absolutely love it. We have a great group of friends, probably, I would say 20 to 22 really close friends up here that we see all the time. And then there's another 20 or 30 that are close, but, not close in like with us. So we never want for things to do, so to speak.
Jim, thanks for joining us today, for taking the time to provide some insight into what really is several of the great mysteries of our time. And again, for completely freaking some of us out.
Yes.
And at the same time, providing a rope back. And I got to say, given who you are and what you've done, it's kind of comforting to know that someone who is willing to consider all of the ramifications of this issue, and not just what seems to be a simplistic solution, is involved. Because this is one you got to get right. And thanks to our sponsor today, Clean Fuego. Spring training is already upon us, so now's the perfect time to take a look at Clean Fuego, the products they provide, and the results that amateurs and professionals alike have experienced. On a quick editorial note, it's always amazed me how invested the pros in the top college programs are. They're always looking for answers or new ways, like Clean Fuego, to help their players improve. But as you move down the baseball food chain, in youth baseball, especially travel teams, where the coaches are far less qualified. Those same coaches are also far more confident. They have all the answers. There's a lesson in there somewhere. And thanks to you for listening and your support for this podcast. If you're a bit like me today, this all can be a bit unsettling, especially when we are forced to consider that the things we've always accepted and been told may not be true. The next time it's a clear night, the moon is new and there's almost no illumination, go outside and look up. Trust me, when you do, this entire discussion will make more sense. Till next time, Earthlings, this has been We and Lewis, the podcast.